Thank you everyone, you're so kind. I really don't need to do a speech here because we've had so many great speeches. Everyone's kind of said exactly what I would say, so you can all go to lunch. No, I'm just joking. It's all right. Look, we stand for so many things in the Heritage Party which I think are positive principles that we really need because our country's lost its way. And we have leaders in our country and around the world that talk consistently and incessantly about freedom and democracy when actually they're destroying freedom and democracy. And this is an inversion of what's right and an inversion of what's good and evil, good and bad. They're turning things upside down and on their heads. And they're just doing what people have done in the mainstream political parties for decades, if not the last century or more. So we have, after the wonderful Queen's funeral on Monday, which I was touched by, and I think a lot of people were touched by and really surprised by, because all these wonderful traditions are coming out again that we've never seen in our lifetime. And as Ben said just then, we live in a wonderful, fantastic country, and we should be proud of our country, and we should be teaching our children to be proud of our country. And we have all of these wonderful traditions and wonderful foundations that we have, and we saw a lot of that on Monday. I really did love the Queen's funeral, although it was a sad occasion. They preached our Christian heritage around the world, and actually I think it was said that 2/3 of the people in the whole world actually watched that service, which was a wonderful thing. But the very next day, Liz Truss, who is now our new Prime Minister, I think she's the 15th Prime Minister that Queen Elizabeth had, was off to New York, and she gave a speech in the United Nations General Assembly. Okay, fair enough, everyone is meeting in the General Assembly, all the leaders of the countries go there. But she keeps banging on about freedom and democracy. But she was in the last government which imposed this tyrannical lockdown on the country, and she was in the government as the Foreign Secretary with these people who are completely overturning democracy with all of these new laws that they're trying to bring in to create a tyrannical, totalitarian state. So I don't know how anyone could stand up on a stage with a straight face and say that our values are freedom and democracy when they have just been trying to undermine them consistently for the last 2 years, as we've seen over lockdown, but over decades and decades before that. Anyone who was in the government that imposed the Coronavirus Act, that voted for that and then voted to fire care home workers from their jobs and terrorise them and saying if you don't get an experimental injection in your arm, you won't be allowed to go to work, you won't be allowed to make a living. Anyone who says they're standing up for freedom is an absolute hypocrite. And it's not just the people that were in the government in this country, the 110 or so in the government, and then there's the party, the fake Conservative Party as I call them, which is what they are, because they got the brand name, they're supposed to be conservative, but almost everything they do is anti-conservative. So those MPs there, and all the other MPs in the Labour Party, the Lib Dem, the SNP Party, the Green Party, were all working together to impose the lockdowns. But it's not just that. They talk about democracy, the rule of the people, if you like. That's what democracy is supposed to mean. But there's a whole swathe of new legislation that's ready to go through Parliament or has already gone through Parliament, which is taking away our freedom and undermining our democracy. Not least, we've spoken about the Coronavirus Act, but you've got the Public Order Act coming up, which is going to cancel people's right to protest in certain circumstances. You've got the schools bill coming in, which is one of the most terrible erosions of freedom which we could ever imagine. Because up to now, parents have been the primary educators of their children. And this is so important. It goes along with things like Belinda mentioned earlier about marriage being the bedrock of our foundation. The family is the basic fundamental unit of our society. And if we erode the family, then we erode our society as a whole. And the family is there to pass on our traditions and our values and principles from parents to children through the generations. But what this schools bill wants to do is completely undermine that, along with other things that have already come in, so that parents do not have the choice and freedom to home educate their children as they have done up to now. And what parents and communities actually believe still is that our schools are places where we can be trusted. That they can be trusted to look after our children, and a lot of people still believe that they are there to teach our children maths and English and history and all these good things and give them skills that they can use to survive and thrive in their later life. And that's true still in some places, but a lot of schools, like universities, are being completely infiltrated by people who are pushing wokery, political correctness and cultural Marxism, and that is a terrible thing, and we have to stand up against it and we have to make it stop. So the schools bill coming in is going to undermine parents' right to home educate their children. And one of the unexpected or unintended consequences of the lockdown, which was positive, even though it was all terrible, mostly terrible, and I don't think that the government even thought about this, is a lot of parents started homeschooling their children and took them out of all this dreadful wokery and actually found that their children are doing far, far better through homeschooling, because they're actually learning proper skills and proper facts rather than being indoctrinated with cultural, critical race theory and critical gender theory and gender queer nonsense and climate alarmism and all this rubbish that is coming at them incessantly for those who want to undermine our children's mental health. And we've got that in law now. The 2017 Children and Social Work Act imposed compulsory relationships and sex education on schools in England, and the government guidance says it has to be LGBT inclusive. They recommend it from the age of 4 or 5. Now, whether schools do that or don't do that, you've got organisations that are funded by the government ready to go with highly sexualising content, which is going to totally ruin kids' sexuality and their whole personality and their whole natural development. It is absolutely an evil that is coming over our country. I'd say that word, and it's a strong word, but it is a wickedness that has been released into our country by the political parties in Westminster. So when people say to me, don't talk about that, how dare you say to me, don't talk about this? How dare you say to me, be quiet, keep your mouth shut, and don't stand up for the mental health and the future of our children and the future of our nation. I will stand up and I will talk about it, and I thank you all for being here. Stand with me as well. And that's just one aspect of what these political parties are doing. And they've all been infiltrated by cultural Marxism, which is a long-term plan to corrode and undermine our society. You see, in the 1910s and the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, that was a wickedness that came over that country, and that Russia and the Soviet Union just came out of it after 70 years. But those same people developed the Comintern, the International Communist Party, and they tried to implement those same kind of revolutions all over the world. You probably don't know that Hungary and Bavaria and Austria had communist revolutions, and Italy for a time, but they were overturned relatively quickly by the people who didn't want them. They didn't actually get to implement them here in the UK or the USA. We carried on because we have a very strong civil society which is based on great Christian principles. That means that we have a bulwark against that, or had a bulwark against that. But what's been happening since the 1920s is that there's been a deliberate plan to infiltrate the institutions, corrode them and corrupt them from within, so that our society and all the good things and all the good values and principles that we've had are just completely eroded and turned to mush. And so that people then stop believing in what's good and everything is inverted, and people start believing in anything else apart from what is good. And that comes from the Frankfurt School in the 1920s, and Antonio Gramsci in the Prison Notebooks actually mentions attacking the cultural superstructure rather than the economic substructure. So when people say to me, oh, cultural Marxism, this far-right person said that, you're far-right. Well, no, I'm actually just quoting the Marxist activists themselves. Don't give me that nonsense, please. Not you, but the people out there in the media who say it, or the people who troll me on Twitter all the time. I get huge amounts of trolling on Twitter. I get called every name under the sun, including all the names that you had and other people have said earlier today. But, you know, the long march through the institutions began with the universities. Universities were set up in this country, the first two, Oxford and Cambridge, and for 800 years they taught divinity. They taught theology. They taught people what it was to be a Christian and how to be a better Christian. Fantastic. And then there was the Enlightenment, whatever, rationalism, and then they started teaching the natural sciences. Okay, that's absolutely great, because we had advances in knowledge and technology and science. But since the 1950s, 1960s in particular, they've turned. And now they are starting to undermine everything that they taught before. So whereas before, you know, they still do teach physics and chemistry and maths and so on, universities now have a whole plethora of new subjects, like gender studies, where you can learn why men are bad. And you have race studies, where you can learn why white people are bad. And you have climate studies, where you can learn why carbon dioxide is bad. And all of this is absolute nonsense, because of course men are good, women are good, men are good, white people are good, black people are good, carbon dioxide is good, everybody breathes it out every day. People who want to go carbon neutral, why don't you end by stopping breathing yourself, you know? Seriously. It's nonsense, isn't it? So all of this is the universities, they have been infiltrated, and unfortunately that's trickled down to schools, as I've said. So schools are now teaching kids all kinds of nonsense. But also the political parties and the media have been infiltrated as well. You know, the foundation stone of the BBC says, "To the glory of God," in the 1920s. It's not giving glory to God anymore. Dare I say it, it's giving glory to the devil and to the wickedness that is coming through these cultural Marxist ideologies. And so are most of the other mainstream media corporations as well. So they don't have me on very often, although as many of you have remarked to me today, you saw me on Piers Morgan Uncensored on Tuesday. And Uncensored, I think, is rather ironic, because I didn't have much of a chance to get a word in edgeways, although I did do my best. So when they do have me on, you know, I go on GB News, and I really do appreciate the gig I have on there, because they do let me talk. talk about whatever I like. But that wasn't the case on Mr. Morgan Uncensored. So that's what they do, and they try to bring me in to destroy me. That was the point, and I knew that from almost the moment I walked into the room and the studio. But there we go. We have to find our own ways of getting the word out, that we are here to stand to restore sanity and common sense to our nation. And that's all we need. You know, I was a chemistry teacher for 20 years or so. I was just minding my own business. But I was always interested in politics, and then I got involved about 10 years ago because I was concerned about the EU and I was concerned about political correctness. But now it's gone on 10 years and those things have got even worse. So we need to get back into the media, we need to get the message out, and this is just what most people thought 30 or 40 years ago. All I'm doing, and all most of you are doing, is standing for what was common sense 30 or 40 years ago, and people are just crying out for a party that will represent them. I hear so many people, millions of people saying, I'm politically homeless. And I say, well, come and join us in the Heritage Party because we are founded on a set of positive principles. And I wanted to do that because it's very, very easy to know what you're against. You know, I'm against the cultural Marxism, I'm against the critical race theory, the climate alarmism, the New World Order, the rules that are forcing people to get injected or they lose their jobs, and the coming digital identity, the central bank digital currency that Rishi Sunak talked about and other people clearly want to bring in. We don't want that. We want to keep on using cash because we want our freedom. So it's really easy to know what we're against, but sometimes it's harder to define what you're for. So hopefully you've all read the manifesto and you know what we stand for. And I think if people see we're a party that's not just against this, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this. We have a positive vision for the future of our nation. We stand for traditional family values. We stand for freedom, for free speech, for liberty, for self-sufficiency in skills and energy and food. We stand for controlling our borders and low immigration because we don't want to create problems and tensions in society, in towns and cities around the country which have been built up through uncontrolled, unlimited immigration over the last 25, 30 years. We're not against it, but it needs to be controlled and it needs to be targeted, and it shouldn't undermine our communities and the fabric of our society and our nation. That's just simple common sense. So that's all the things that we're for, and of course we're pro-life as well, as we've had the speech earlier by Christian from the Centre for Bioethical Research, which is a very important thing to stand for, the right to life of unborn children. Because another one of our principles, thank you. Another one of our principles is equality before the law. And so this is another thing that has been undermining our society because of these characteristics which are defined in the Equality Act. If you have a certain protected characteristic, you can claim that if someone commits a crime against you, it was homophobic, or it was racist, or it was Islamophobic, and then you get fast-tracked through the police and criminal justice system. And people who don't have those characteristics, essentially straight white men, you know, you find that you get harsher treatment now under the law than if you're a gay black woman. It's just a simple fact, because our Equality Act has completely skewed that equality under the law, so there is no equality under the law anymore. And there isn't equality under the law for unborn children either. I want that to be changed so that it doesn't matter whether you're black or white or straight or gay or young or old or rich or poor or male or female, you get treated equally under the law and you have equal opportunities. So those are our positive principles, and I do so much thank you all for being part of this day. And Richard talked about the times in UKIP, and I was in that party back in before the EU referendum. And I do remember going to rooms full of 3 or 4 or 5 people. But there's so many more of you here today, and this is just our first conference. So it's wonderful to see you all, and thank you so much for your lovely warm welcome to me and all the other speakers. But please do take the next step. Become a candidate. Become a candidate in the local elections. It's free. You don't need to pay a deposit. All you need to do is fill in 6 forms and get 10 signatures. Sounds a lot, but a lot of them are very easy, okay? So if you start now, you can fill in 6 forms by the end of March, okay? Everyone can do that. Please do. The more candidates we have, the more exposure we have, the more we grow, the more we can have chances to get into local government. And then, of course, we have the general election. It's probably going to be coming up in May 2024, but we don't know exactly when that's going to be. So it's a big, big target for us, but I want to have 650 candidates in every single seat in this country in the next general election, because I want to give people, everyone everywhere, a chance to vote for someone who stands for good principles, so they don't have to vote fake Conservative or Labour or Lib Dem or Green or SNP on the ballot paper and vote to bring their country down. I want everyone to have a chance to vote for someone who is going to raise our country up again and restore our nation. Thank you so much, everybody.